if you want to get into football and the football industry, you need to understand the football industry, not football. You need to understand how the money works in the game, how broadcasters make money, how clubs do it, how players effectively, talent businesses to a degree. And so part of the book is basically now, well, if you want to be in the football industry, you need to start consuming lots of football content, but not best goals on YouTube or.
Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Sporting Global podcast. And today I'm here with Daniel Geey. And Daniel, first of all, thanks for taking the time. How's life in London these days?
We're all good. It's a bit cold and miserable outside, but I'm in the office. It looks like I'm in a padded cell, but I promise I'm not in a. This is just one of our little rooms that we have to be able to do calls and stuff. So it's all good. Busy time up until Christmas. Lots going on. World Cup obviously going on still at the moment as well, and we're doing some really interesting stuff before in the lead up to that with a lot of players that we work with closely. So 2 or 3 weeks worth of work to go, and then hopefully I get a little break before the transfer window starts.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, like I guess that's the next big thing coming up for you, right? It's the January transfer window, I assume. So that's going to be quite some hectic time.
Well, it's everything in between. Like, at least very briefly, I work with a lot of agents and players, and then family members, effectively. And
right.
My role a lot of the time can be a mix of making sure that sometimes when the transfer window opens on the 1st of January, most of the deals already been agreed, and actually things can happen quite quickly.
Right.
A lot of the time, as is reported. It can be very much a reactive game. So if one transfer happens, then another does, and then another team has enough money, and then otherwise, and then it's a bit of a game of chess. And sometimes things happen very last minute. I always try and speak to a lot of my clients and say, tell me what you've got coming up, and so we can work out timings on stuff and all the rest of it. And a lot of the time they'll be like, well, we're just going to wait and see, and then suddenly something comes really quickly for a lot of the groundwork that they might have put in a lot of time before, and you can get a pretty busy 48 hours sometimes.
I can't imagine, but let's backtrack a little bit and kind of just start from like the beginning, because I think obviously there's a lot of good insights, a lot of experience from your side. But why don't we kind of like start where, like, how did your journey essentially start in the sport industry? Take us a little bit through kind of like that passion and how your journey started.
So the short answer is, I grew up in Liverpool in northwest England, and I was a mad, and still am, not quite as mad Liverpool fan, but just went to all the games, consumed as much newspaper content as I could. This was sort of the pre-internet days,
right?
So we had VHS tapes and a live football match every now and then on terrestrial TVs. Like, it's nothing like it is today or otherwise,
right.
And that sort of passion grew, and I decided at least to do a law degree, basically because a lot of my family are lawyers, and I thought it would be a multi-purpose degree. I wasn't even really that convinced I was actually going to be a lawyer for a long time, really. But decided to go down that route to start with. And in the meantime, when I was doing my master's degree, I did a master's degree in football broadcasting rights, which gave me just a chance to be able to read about football in more detail. And then, for almost the best part of 10 years at a European law firm called Phil Fisher, I was, doing competition law and antitrust law in loads of random sectors like aviation and financial services and agriculture and car part manufacturing, and all of these sectors that don't sound quite as cool as sports and football in truth. But what I was sort of developing in the sort of side hustle was a strong network of people inside the sports industry at my level and above, really, that were developing at that time. I started a Twitter handle called Football Law and started blogging really regularly on sports and football related topics. And over a period of time, that got me to speak on TV on particular topics. There were things like third-party ownership, which was to do with Carlos Tevez and Javier Mascherano. There was issues to do with the financial fair play rules, and then PSG and Man City and all of those issues. There were loads of disputes going on. Luis Suarez, John Terry, Rio Ferdinand matters that were going on at those times as well. So I almost realized that there was that relative niche to try and explain complicated legal concepts, disputes, issues in a more accessible way. And as a result of that, I was able then to meet and chat and discuss these topics with, a lot of industry specialists, a lot of people inside the game and outside the game. And that just strengthened my network. And so that when people came and asked me questions on stuff and needed legal advice, the good thing is that I hopefully had a strong legal skills. I had strong legal skills mixed with a good industry understanding, which allowed me then to be able to give that advice. And ultimately what happened was I started working a lot with a couple of agencies and agents, managed to do a good job on some high profile deals throughout a few windows, and that then led to other people saying, "Oh, you should chat to Daniel," and that led to people getting in touch, and that led to all of those opportunities that come around as a result. But bear in mind, this was like 10-15 years in the making, really.
Yeah, no, I mean, like, of course, and I think this is important to mention too. It's a process, right? And it takes time, and building that reputation, and obviously showing the value over time. It doesn't happen overnight, and I think it's something we always try to enforce and push to the students and the young people that are listening that wants to work so much in this industry too. It's a journey, to be part of, and there's a lot of lessons to take with you from that.
I think that's totally right, and we can talk about it in a bit, but I'm not sure I've mentioned it to you, but I've actually written a book that's hopefully going to be published at the beginning of next year on a career journey in sport and in the wider entertainment industry. And one of the two things that we could talk about maybe in more detail, but one of them specifically, or two of them specifically, is this idea of patience. And it's not like I was patient when I was a young lawyer. I actually really wanted to do sport right away. I really wanted to do football right away, but it didn't necessarily happen for me right away. And that didn't necessarily put me off, which was a good thing, really, because I still had all of this other work that I was doing that just wasn't as glamorous, wasn't as cool, wasn't as interesting. But that laid the groundwork, because the thing is that and it leads to this patience idea, which I'm sure is something, Ollie, that you talk about quite a lot. Which is, just because it doesn't happen for you in the short term doesn't mean it can't happen in the long term. And you can set that groundwork, and you can set that planning and that process, exactly as you said, so that the thing that will sustain you is your passion, your curiosity, your interest in the topic. You might want to be the best sports or football marketeer in the world that you can be. That doesn't mean in the short term that you can't work in the financial services in sector for pharmaceuticals marketing, or for detergent for marketing, whatever it might be. And then you develop those fantastic marketing skills first, and then you realize actually that those skills are transferable into sport, or for entertainment, or for music, or for football, or whatever else it might be.
No, 100%. And I mean, like, it's as you said, it's something that we try to more so kind of share the stories from people like yourself, kind of like what is the reality, right, of going into sports, and also a little bit about like the process around it, the journey, like the different kind of angles and steps that people have had to take, maybe go in a different industry first, or of course building your way up, moving to a different country. There's so many ways that you can enter, and sort of like just explaining to them and showcasing the reality of what it's like. Okay, this is the sports and passion you have, and you want to be part of this industry. It doesn't happen overnight, and it's a journey, and you got to follow your passion. And I wanted to obviously talk a little bit about the precedents. Obviously, you're a partner of the sports group at Sheridans, a leading law firm in the UK. Talk a little bit about like some of your practice focuses, some of the things that you're doing in your role today, and I guess your focus areas.
Of course. So there's usually about four. Well, there's lots of different focus areas, but I think the two or three, and then there's subcategories of that effectively are: one is everything player and agent related. So that can be, a transfer, it can be a contract renegotiation, it can be an image rights deal, it can be a boot deal, it can be any type of brand or ambassador commercial deals. There's a whole a lot of work that I do around, for example, dispute management. So disciplinary matters involving the player. If there's a dispute between a player and an agent, between a player and a club, between an agent and a club, between two clubs, between various elements. I do quite a lot of work in reputation management along with other people and lawyers in my team. So that can be stories in the press or things that are potentially said. And then there's a lot of growing work in, for example, players are becoming and are seeing lots of different interesting investment opportunities. So they'll invest in lots of different businesses too, which is a growing area. So we help them with all of that. And then the flip side, at least for my sort of day to day, is I also work either on the buy side or sell side with high net worth investors that want to invest into football, and usually that's in football clubs. So we do a variety of club takeovers in the Premier League, in the Championship, in the lower leagues, and non-league as well, in truth. And so we have quite a specialism across the EFL, effectively, for the amount of volume of deals that we've done. So it tends to be generally more player and agency and talent side is my day-to-day, but it also mixes with some football club work too.
Well, it's nice to have a variety of angles to work with, and I'm sure you get your hands full with the player agent side of things anyways at a daily basis. I'm sure there's enough cases we could talk about from that side. And speaking a little bit into, I guess, I think it would be good, especially for the people that are listening. They're obviously very curious, and some of the times they kind of like only see this from the outside, right? And so if you could give like a deeper look into some of the cases you've worked on in the football industry, and I think it would be nice both from like a club takeover side, but also from a transfer side. Obviously, you can separate it a little bit, just a little bit about the process and something that you think is important for these young people to know or think about in the process.
Well, I think the first thing, I mean, I talk about it in the book Done Deal that I published a few years ago, is like, for example, on the agency side for agents, I think it's very easy to give agents a bad reputation. In truth, they earn millions of pounds, they do little work, they just turn up and negotiate the figures and take a huge commission. And the truth is, usually in my experience, that couldn't be further away from the truth. I see, because I work with a lot of very good agents, the incredible amount of hard work that goes into those type of things, building relationships with clubs, with the chief executives, with the chairman, with the scouts, with the sporting directors, finding solutions when problems occur, which is very, very common. There can be times when players don't want to leave, when they do want to leave, when clubs don't want to sell, when they do want to sell, when clubs want to do particular things and are valuing the player too highly, and the player doesn't want to go unless, they're paid off for a certain amount of money, or the exact opposite, where a club's willing to give them lots of money to be able to leave, etc. And so the thing I'd say generally is, I can sometimes get involved quite early in a deal and sometimes quite late in the deal. We had deals in the summer where, the agent's phoning me on the way to the club's training ground where they're going to sign in 3 hours, and they say, just have a quick look over the contract. And there are others which might be a renegotiation that would take months and months to be able to do and get over the line. So, the truth is, for young people starting out in the sports, never mind football industry, and working in law or in different elements of it, the truth is that I always say is that at first instance, you've got to be in whatever your profession is. If it's law, if it's accountancy, if it's marketing, social media, comms, PR, you got to have that strong skill set in your discipline first. And then after that gives you the confidence to be able to say, well, we need to redraft this clause because under this case, this is the reason why this happens. And then that mixed with your football experience, that the regulations and how the rules work, and how things have to be happen, and how registrations occur, and what FIFA TMS is, and all of these various elements that are specific to football and sport. They need to be understood in a lot of detail, and that doesn't come overnight. That's something that has been 20 years in the making for me, and sometimes for the first while I wasn't doing that much work in it. So it's really be the best lawyer, be the best accountant, be the best marketeer, and then your passion, your curiosity will drive you into the areas that probably you feel that you'll be most valued in a way.
Right. No, I mean, like it makes a lot of sense, and I think you touch upon some very um, key areas, not only in terms of just building your expertise and knowledge, right, but also the various cases and scenarios you have to deal with in your position and in going into that space. Obviously, you mentioned more from like a player, club perspective, but from a club takeover approach, like talk a bit about that because I think obviously that's more prominent, and I guess that kind of like exploded a little bit more in the last 10 15 years.
Mm.
And I think it's very hard for a lot of people coming from the outside kind of seeing, okay, yeah, it's somebody bought a new club or the Glaciers going into the United or what it might be, right?
Mm.
Talk a bit about just the process of what's that like, a little bit about like how this journey begins in many ways, just the things that people don't really without obviously sharing too much, but what
Yeah.
you can share, of course.
Well, the truth is, it's a very difficult thing to get over the line. Any type of takeover deal, the
Yeah.
amount of deals that we've done probably 3 times the amount that haven't gone anywhere close to finishing or quite close to finishing.
Right.
So there's all types of questions around what happens. Ultimately, you need a willing buyer and a willing seller. So the current owner of the club needs to be happy with the amount of money that they're willing to get, which usually is obviously one of the biggest stumbling points because of the idea of valuation. So how do you
Sure.
value a football club?
Yeah.
It can be a revenue multiple. It can be to do with how much, liability, how much and how many liabilities the club has got. Have they got big overdrafts? Have they got big loans outstanding? Have they got a great squad, which means they could sell players if they need to? Do they have a great manager? Where are they in a particular league? Are they playing Champions League or are they going to be relegated to the Championship?
Right.
So you have all of these issues and timing issues. It might be that, like, I'll give you an example because we're not involved in it, but
Sure.
for example, Bournemouth in the UK, they're being in the middle of being taken over at the moment, but
Yeah.
the query will always be whether you're going to be taking over because of the time it might take to do a deal, a club that might be in the Premier League or a club that might not be in the Premier League come the end of the season,
Right.
and with other teams. And then also there's always quite a long process with the regulators as well, if that's the Premier League, if it's the EFL, if it's the FA, and that can be quite a long process called the owners and directors test. They need to be able to demonstrate that they've got the funds, that they're reputable people, that they pass the test, they don't have criminal convictions, they haven't been insolvent or they haven't been made bankrupt, and they haven't been banned from particular organizations, etc. So
Yeah.
that can take quite a lot of time as well, and usually involves interviews and going to speak with the relevant organization as you need to. So and then there's always skeletons in the closet, is the truth. As much as you effectively do what's called a due diligence process, where you go through, you look at all of the contracts, look at all of the issues, look at all of the disputes, try and work out how much tax might be owing, see how much transfer fees might be paid, how much money you're going to get in at particular times.
Yeah.
And they're the assumptions that you've based for the valuation of the club. And usually there are things that you have or haven't made presumptions or assumptions on, and that determines maybe what the value, or how a buyer may reevaluate the value of a club accordingly. Usually downwards is the truth.
No, I mean, like and it made me think a lot about when you talk about the case, right? And I mean, like you're kind of like in a position, right, where you don't know now. Okay, are they going to be in the Premier League? Are they going to be in Championship? Like, how much does that impact the deal? Like club takeover in a sense. Obviously, considering because obviously the valuation is going to decrease. If they go down. So like, are they working on kind of multiple scenarios, or like are they?
It can be. It can be. It might well be that depending on when. I mean, I presume everyone wants to try and get a deal concluded as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
But the truth is that you never know. So there might be different contingencies. It's this amount if they stay up. It's
Yeah.
this amount if they go down.
Right.
It's this amount if they go down, but they get re-promoted inside the next 2 years.
Sure.
There's this amount if they go down and stay down.
Yeah.
There'll be particular bonuses if certain things happen, etc. But
Right.
yeah, it can be pretty complicated. And the truth is also, because there's a lot of US owners and foreign ownership groups coming into the Premier League and the UK more generally, then there's issues to do with currency fluctuations. It might be cheaper to buy clubs at particular times. It might be more expensive. When Liz Truss in the the UK announced her spending plans, the dollar versus the pound was at an extraordinarily good level for a particular time. So people might have hedged and done particular things with their money at that particular time because of the value that might have brought to a particular deal. But that's the way it goes.
And I guess even Brexit, right, had an impact on this in a certain degree.
Yeah. I mean, don't get me started on Brexit, which is obviously
I was like, started bringing up in my mind. I was like, that's probably a factor too.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big European, generally, European advocate, but there's lots of changes there. Basically, among anything else, it's free movement of workers effectively, which then, stopped when when the UK left Europe, or left the EU. And then there's new, obviously, work permit regulations as a result, which have complicated things and made things actually sometimes more straightforward, sometimes more difficult. And we've had issues with players and managers and coaching staff, etc., which Brexit made more difficult actually to a degree, because obviously, as your listeners will know, pre-Brexit, any European player with a European passport could simply come to the UK, show their passport, and that would give them grounds to enter the UK. Whereas now there's particular points criteria if you haven't played enough national team games that you have to adhere to, otherwise you're not getting in.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I mean, like, obviously it's a big change, right, in just the evaluation process and just also like how I guess in a sense how valuable or is the risk worth taking, right, of getting a player from abroad at this point. It will obviously be an extensive factor. I wanted to talk a bit about obviously also the some typical pitfalls that future football leaders should keep in mind when it comes to legal matters in the football club industry. Like, what are some typical pitfalls you've seen, and I guess like perhaps more in recent time or more at a general level that you think would be important for the future leaders to keep an eye on or be aware
of? Pitfalls specifically in football. Well, I think it's like anything. Football, like a lot of other sectors, if it's fashion, TV, film, entertainment, music, computer games, they're all a collaboration of entertainment sectors where people have a real passion, curiosity, as I said, to want to be involved. And I think the thing that a lot of people feel is that they have this thing, which is if they're out of university or soon out of university and they can't get their dream role, that's it for them. That they can't then do the thing later down the line. And we talked about patience, we talked about not necessarily seeing the short term versus the long term opportunity. And I think the important thing for people generally to be thinking about is, again, like skills acquisition is the key, and not to get too demoralized is the truth. I know a lot of people will do master's degrees in a specific sport, football or general entertainment industry, and be like, well, I've done this now and it'll be a waste if I then don't get my first or second job in the thing that I really, really, really want to do. And my view generally is I've done it almost the other way, where by necessity, because there was not a job for me in sports and football in law early on in my career. This was me just, well, I've got to be the best lawyer I can be first, as we talked about as well. And so I think this sort of patience mixed with trying to depressurize yourself, which is, if it doesn't happen now, it's not the end of the world, which is quite an important thing, I think, to think about. And then working out a plan long term to mix your skills with your industry insights then becomes the most important thing, because what ends up happening is if you get a really good set of skills mixed with that industry insight, what ends up happening, if you're very good at your job, the sports industry will need you more than you'll need the sports industry. So then you wait and you find and you look for those right opportunities that mix your skill set with your industry knowledge. And you realize actually that you're perfect for the job. It's just you might not have that same amount of sports experience, but that's always the thing that you can develop and learn more about. People are interested more generally in your ability to get the job done at first.
No, it's a really good point. And I mean, like, if you have that passion and knowledge or interest, in sports or football in general, I mean, like, as you were saying, it's just kind of staying on top of what's happening in the industry, kind of, reading, or as even you were doing, like, being creative, starting like, a blog or a handle or whatever, kind of, be part of it without, actually necessarily you have to be in there yet, just kind of being aware of the ecosystem, what's going on, and obviously listening to our podcast every week, so can see,
Correct.
soak up, knowledge from a lot of different people. And we're about to reach kind of like the end here, and I wanted as well. Obviously, you mentioned two books, but I wanted to. And you're free to talk about both, but I think the newest book kind of like fits well with the last question.
Mm.
But now, kind of obviously, talking a little bit about the book Down Deal. Talk a little bit about the purpose behind this book and some of the key lessons that you brought up in this book.
No, thank you. So, I mean, I wrote Done Deal now quite a few years back.
Yeah.
Primarily, it was not that long ago, I guess, but it feels like a long time ago in my mind. But yeah, it's published in 2018, 19, I think it was. Yeah. And it was basically my premise that I pitched the publisher to Bloomsbury was I wanted to write the book that would have been very valuable for me to have read 15 or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Because you read a lot of stuff about the on-pitch stuff,
yeah,
and you read a lot of stuff about the off-pitch stuff, but generally around the headlines of transfers and contracts and stuff. But what a lot of people don't or haven't been able to provide insight on is actually the interesting detail about what's in a contract. How does a bonus work?
Right.
Why is the word appearance so important? What are funny, interesting clauses? What are the stuff that goes on behind the scenes?
Right.
Why are agents actually doing an interesting job? How does the money flow in football? How does it really work in practice? Why are players so valuable? Almost demystifying some of the particular areas of the industry as well, which is quite important. And
Sure.
by being able to do that, and actually, in a way, think about the questions that I would have wanted answered all those years ago, it allowed me almost to be in the position of, right, well, I'm a football fan first.
Yeah.
I'm interested in industry second, and now I've been privileged enough to work in the industry for a while. Sure. I felt I was well positioned to write the book that actually hadn't really been written before. And luckily enough, a lot of people bought it and read it, have said really kind things about it, and it's opened up, just so many fantastic opportunities for me to go and speak to conferences, speak to people. Generally people come up and say congratulations on the book, and it's on the whole being a really, really worthwhile thing. I think what people don't see is that, like, literally the thousands and thousands of hours it took me to write it, which was tough going at the time, but ultimately it's all been worthwhile now.
That's awesome, and I'm glad to hear that. Well, I mean, like, I kind of have to ask you though, like, what are some funny, interesting clauses you you have seen? You gotta now you have to spill it out.
Well, okay, so I'll tell you about a few that are in the book, especially. So there was a player that used to play for Sunderland and Arsenal called Stefan Schwarz. He was a Swedish international player, very good left-footed player. Yeah. And he had a clause in his Sunderland deal that stopped him from going into space, which is obviously quite a strange one. I'd never really heard or seen of that one before, because one of the Sunderland employees had read an article that he had, an interview he'd done, which said one day he wanted to go into space. So They made sure that he couldn't go into space during his time at Sunderland. And we had another one where when Neymar Jr. was at Barcelona, Barcelona had a clause which effectively said that to make sure he was happy in his life and things were going well, that he could have an all expenses flight with, I think it was 6 or 8 of his friends flown over from Brazil to come and have time with him and party with him in Barcelona every, I think, 2 or 3 months to keep him happy, basically, which sounds like a very clever clause to have in your contract, as long as you're not partying too much and enjoying yourself when you should be maybe playing well on the pitch. Although, to be fair, that was the time when it was Neymar and Suarez and Messi doing pretty well, so maybe
he was happy for sure. It was working. I mean, like, honestly, I think maybe, but I think maybe we have to do like another episode just talking about classes, like this is some interesting stuff. But I
No
know we're
problem.
running out of time, and I want to just have like one more question I want to ask
Of
you. And
course.
that's essentially, I know you touched a little upon it, like the patience, the skill set, especially for the young students and professional here. But kind of like to wrap things up, maybe, highlight a few things. What tips do you have, for students looking to get a career in the football industry? Doesn't have to be law, can be law, of course, as
Yeah.
well, but just
No,
that
exactly.
wants to be part of the football industry. What final kind of tips, advice would you give them?
I think there's a few. So if I can maybe lead it into the book that is hopefully that I've written, that's hopefully going to be published in January. So it's a book called Build the Invisible, and the book is basically trying to set out a number of key ideas, to sort of practical ideas to build your dream career. That's how I try and phrase it effectively. And
Yeah.
there's about 5 key elements really to it all. And effectively what I try and explain is, if you want to get into football and the football industry, you need to understand the football industry, not football. You need to understand how the money works in the game, how broadcasters make money, how clubs do it, how players effectively, talent businesses to a degree. And so part of the book is basically now, well, if you want to be in the football industry, you need to start consuming lots of football content, but not best goals on YouTube or
Right.
funniest moments on TikTok. It's like understand the finances of the game.
Yeah.
And that might sound boring, but actually that's the way that and it leads on to my second point, is that when you start then being able to speak to people in the industry, you can combine obviously your love for the game, which is, oh, fantastic, did you see Neymar's goal yesterday, or did you see the controversial thing that happened? But you can also say, well, isn't it interesting because FIFA sold their broadcasting rights for the World Cup for this amount of money, and actually then that leads for that national association to spend it on grassroots, and then one thing leads to another, which
Right.
demonstrates that you know what you're talking about when it comes to the football industry.
Yeah.
And what then happens as a result is, I sort of call it in this chapter called compounding, basically, is that when you do something day after day, week after week, year after year, you build this routine of consuming content, but important industry, financial content about the industry that you want to get into.
Yeah.
You're then speaking with lots of people across a network that will then, you will demonstrate your value because you know an awful lot about it. And that routine becomes important because you're saying it, you're doing it day after day after day after day. And then the last thing that that I write, which is probably, I think, one of the most important things, is it's really important to mix patience with reliability, but mainly with perseverance. And
Right.
perseverance is like a big thing, and I think it's a really underrated thing. Simply because I can't tell you the amount of times that I've had rejections, that things haven't gone right for me, that things that I thought were going to be great have ended up not so well, and things otherwise have taken me down lots of different paths.
Right.
And this idea of things not working out perfectly straight away is a really important takeaway, I think, which is, if you stay with the process, one of the first things you talked about at the beginning of this podcast, if you stay with the process, you keep the routine, you keep developing yourself. Usually when no one's looking, what are you going to do at 9 o'clock at night? You're going to watch 3 episodes of Netflix, or you're going to read the next 3 articles of a football industry journal that might be really useful for an interview that you don't even know you've got at the moment.
Right.
And so if you can do all of those things regimented over a long period of time, you're onto a good thing. Because if I just finish on one thing, a lot of people say to me, well, Daniel, what's the secret for you working in the football industry? And the misapprehension of the question is almost a really important thing, because the thing is, there's no secret.
Right.
The secret actually is boring consistency. and it's not an easy sell, is the truth. No one wants to
Yeah.
hear, oh, well, it's just boring and it's consistent and you just got to repeat it and you've got to do a routine. But that's
Right.
what it is. You've got to start off one day, then the next day, and then 1 month, as I said, and then 1 year, and then 3 years. And then someone will come to you one day after you've maybe had a really good interview and you've got into the football industry, and they say, what's the secret? How did you manage to do it? And then you can say back to them, well, the truth is, it's not, there isn't no secret. What it is boring consistency compounded over a long period of time. And if you can keep up that approach, you're in a really good position to try and hopefully get you close to the dream job that you want to do.
Absolutely. Well, with that, Daniel, I would like to thank you so much for taking the time, for sharing your stories, your insights, your journey. It's been a pleasure having you part of this, and thank you once again for taking the time.
No problem. Speak soon.
Absolutely. And I have before we leave though, I have one final thing. It's like a tradition we do at the Sporting Goal podcast, and I have to teach you a little bit Norwegian before we leave.
Let's go for it.
Yeah. So with every video we do, we always finish with "Vi snakkes," which means see you later in Norwegian. So that's what you have to say.
Well, before I say "vi snakkes," I should have given you one more example, basically, which is one of on the clauses, which was. I'm sure you guys know Stig Inge Bjørneby, who's the famous Liverpool Norwegian left back from some time ago. He actually had a very famous clause put in his contract because apparently one of his family members was a very good Olympic skier. And the rumor was that in his Liverpool contract, they had a specific clause that prohibited him from skiing just in case he broke his leg or did anything dangerous, so that then he would continue to play for Liverpool and not be injured for a long period of time. So that's my Norwegian football clause specific
Awesome.
Example for you.
Awesome. I like it. Thank you so much, Daniel. And as always, vi snakkes.
Vi snakkes.
Thank you.